Welcome back, and let's see how far we can get with Abbot Mortimer and the rest of our friends in Redwall. Okay, so we last stopped heading into chapter 9. So, Abbot Mortimer and Constance the Badger meandered through the ground together. Both creatures were deep in thought. Had they spoken and voiced their thoughts? They would have mentioned the same subject, the safety of Redwall. Down long ages of beautiful old abbey had stood for happiness, peace, and refuge to all. Diligent mice tended to the neat little vegetable patches, which every season gave forth an abundance of fresh produce: cabbage, sprouts, marrows, turnips, peas, carrots, tomatoes, lettuce, and onions. All in their turn. Flower beds, heady and fragrant, with countless varieties of summer blooms, from rose to humble daisy, were planted by the mice and husbanded by the hard-working bee folk, who in their turn rewarded Redwall with plentiful supply of honey and beeswax. The two friends wandered onward past the pond. Early morning sunlight gleamed off the water, throwing out ripples from the fish caught by the overnight lines, which were baited and lifted to drift each evening by Brother Alf. Ahead of them lay the berry hedges, raspberry, blackberry, bilberry, and strawberry patch, where every August sleepy baby creatures could be seen on their stomachs full after eating the pick of the crop. Gradually they made their way around the big old chestnut tree into the orchard. This was the abbot's favorite spot. Many of leisurely nap had he taken on the sunny afternoons, with the aroma of ripened fruit hovering in his whiskers: apples, pears, quince, plums, damsons, even a vine of wild grape on the warm red stone of a south fence wall. Old Mother Nature's blessing lay upon a haven of warm friendliness. Now, with the threat of Kleiny upon Redwall, the two old friends assessed the boundless bounty of their lifelong abode. Sweet birdsong on the still air tingled Constance's heart with sorrow and regret that this peaceful existence would soon pass. Gruffly she sniffed deep in her throat, blinked off a threatening teardrop. The abbot sensed his companion's distress. He patted the badger's rough coat with a gentle paw. There, old girl, don't fret. Many times in our history has tragedy been forestalled by miraculous happenings. Constance gritted in agreement, not wishing to disillusion her trusted old friend. Deep within her, she knew a dark shadow was casting itself over the abbey. Furthermore, it was happening in the present, not in bygone days of fabled deeds. Mathis seated himself to an early breakfast in Cavern Hall. Nut bread, apples, and a bowl of fresh goat milk. Cornflower, along with her woodland creatures, granted sanctuary, was sleep in the makeshift quarters provided by the good mice of Redwall. Mathis felt that he had grown up overnight. Duty was a mantle that he had taken willingly upon his shoulders. If there was a threat to Redwall from outside, it must be dealt with. The mice of Redwall were peaceful creatures, but that must not be taken as a sign of weakness. Slowly he munched away as he confronted the problem. Eat heartily, Mathis. No point in facing trouble on an empty stomach. Feed the body, nourish the mind. The young mouse was surprised to see that old brother Matthew had been watching him. His eyes twinkled behind the curious spectacles he invariably wore. The ancient mouse sat down at the breakfast table with a small groan. Don't look so surprised, young one. Your face is an open book to one of my years. Matthias drained the last of his milk from his bowl, wiping cream from his whiskers with the back of his paw. Give me your advice, brother Matthew, he said. What would you do? The old mouse wrinkled his nose. Exactly the same thing. Exactly the same thing you would. That is, if I were younger and not so old and stiff. Mathis felt he had found an ally. You mean you would fight? Mathis rapped the table with a bony paw. Of course I would. It's the only sensible course to take. He paused and stared at Mathis in an old manner. You know, there's something about you, young feller. Did you ever hear the story of how Martin the warrior first came to Redwall? Mathis leaned forward eagerly. Martin, tell me, brother. I love hearing about the warrior monk. Methuselah's voice dropped to a secretive whisper. It is written in the great chronicles of Redwall that Martin was very young to be such a warrior. He could have been the same age as yourself, Mathis. Like you, he was impulsive and had a great quality of youthful innocence about him when he first came to our abbey. But it's also written that in times of trouble, Martin had the gift of a natural leader, a command over others, far superior to him in age and experience. The Chronicle says that they looked to Martin as some look to a strong father. Mathis was full of wonderment, but he could not help feeling puzzled. Why do you tell me this? Why do you tell all this to me, Brother Methuselah? The old mouse stood up. He stared hard at Mathis for a moment, then he turned and he stiffened slowly as he went. He called back over his shoulder, "Because, Mathis, because he was very like you." Before the young mouse could question the old one further, the Joseph bell tolled out a warning. Sandals flipping, Mathis dashed out into the grounds, nearly colliding with the abbot and Constance, who, like everyone else, were heading for the gatehouse. Brother Rufus and George had an incident to report. A large, evil-looking rat, covered in tattoos, carrying a rusty cutlass, had turned up at the gate. He had tried to gain entry by pretending he was injured. Limping about, the rat explained that he had been in a cart that overturned into the ditch. Would they come with him and render assistance to his friends, many of whom were lying trapped beneath the cart, crying out for help? Brother Rufus was no fool. "How many rats were traveling in the cart altogether?" he asked. "Oh, a couple hundred," came the glib reply. "Then why," reasoned Brother Rufus, "did the rats not give aid to their own companions? Surely all 200 were not trapped." The rat evaded the question and made a great show of rubbing his injured leg. Could they not take him in and dress his wounds, and perhaps give him a bite to eat, at least? Brother George agreed on condition that the rat surrender his weapon. The rat made as if to do so, then suddenly lunged at Brother George, only to be sent sprawling by a blow from Brother Rufus's staff. Realizing that he was up against two big, competent mice who would stand no nonsense, he became abusive and bad-mouthed. "Ha! Just you wait, mice," he raged. "There's a whole army of us camped down in the church. When I tell Kleiny how you treated me, ho, just wait. That's all. We'll be back by the frang, he will." The grim news was disgusted in silence by the assembled creatures. Miss Churchmouse began sobbing. "Oh, dearie me, did you hear that, my dear? They must be living in our home at St. Ninan's church. Oh, whatever shall we do? Oh, dear little home full of dreadful rats." Mr. John Churchmouse tried to comfort his wife as best as he could. There now. Hush now, missus. Better to lose a house than lose our lives. A good job we got sanctuary here at Redwall. But what about the other creatures in the area?" cried Mathis. "Sensible mouse," said Constance. "Is Ambrose Sprite anywhere about? He'd better do the rounds and tell them to take sanctuary here at the Abbey as quickly as possible. Spike will come to no harm. Once he curls up, there's nothing can touch him." This area was greeted with enthusiasm. Brother went off to find the hedgehog. The abbot suggested they all go inside the abbey and await further developments. Mathis piped up again. We'd best mount a guard on the walls. One of the older mice, Sister Clemence, chided Mathis as an upstart. Her voice was stern, and considering Novice Mathis, you will be silent and do it as your abbot commands. Much to everyone's surprise, the abbot came to Mathis's defense. One moment, Clemence. Mathis, speak sense. Let us hear what he has to say. We are none of us too old to learn. All eyes were turned to the young mouse as Mathis heard himself boldly outline his plans for the defense of Redwall. It was 11 o'clock on that glorious June morning. Mossflower Wood and the meadowlands stirred to the brazen voice of great Joseph Bell. John Churchmouse heaved on the bell rope as he had been told by Constance and Mathis. Bong, boom, bong, boom. Even the small creatures in the wood and field who could understand no language save their own knew what it meant. Time of danger, place of sanctuary. Carrying what simple belongings they needed, woodlanders and their family hurried from far and near to gain the safety of the abbey before the storm of calamity broke upon them. Squirrels, mice, voles, moles, otters, all save the bird of the air, who were safe anyway. Up the long dusty road they came, mothers protecting hurting young ones, while fathers provided a rear guard. Brother Methuselah stood at the gate with the abbot. He translated translated fully to each group of creature the abbot's message, in turn constructing back to Father Abbot their grateful thanks with pledges of help and loyalty to Redwall Abbey. For what creatures had not been freely given the aid and special knowledge of the kindly mice, all knew that they owed their very existence to the abbey as to his abbot and his community. Healing, aid, food, shelter, and good advice were granted to all. Now was the time to unite and repay, to give help that was possible. Before much longer, Redwall would require the skills and knowledge of all its woodland allies. They would be gratefully given. Mathis and Constance stood on top of the high perimeter walls, watching the road. It was noon, and the sun shone directly overhead. Despite the heat, Mathis had ordered all the mice to put on their hoods. It served a double purpose: to shield the eyes from the sun and create a camouflage effect. Silently, each one stood armed with a stout staff. A high red sandstone wall were far too lofty to be scaled by any normal creature. Instinctively, Mathis knew this was a good defense for a formidable deterrent. Constance could feel her ankles beginning to prickle. She sniffed the air and shivered despite the heat that simmered in waves across the meadowlands. The big badger nudged Mathis. Listen to that. Mathis pricked up his ears and looked at her, questioning. Even the birds have stopped singing, Constance said quietly. The young mouse gripped his staff tighter. Yes, it's the silence that we can hear. The grasshoppers have gone quiet. Constance peered down the road as she spoke. Strange for a summer day, little friend. Bong! Every creature standing in the wombats twitched with fright as the loud voice of Joseph Bell rang out, and John Churchmouse shouted from his position high in the belfry. They're coming down the road. I can see them. I can see them. I'm going to try and get through chapter 10. Cluny's army halted at the sound of the Joseph Bell. As the dust settled, Fangburn looked to his leader for approval. They're ringing that big bell again, Chief. Ha ha. Maybe they think it'll frighten us off. The warlord's eyes rested balefully on his scout. Shut your mouth, fool. If you'd done as I ordered and come right back to report, the way Cheese Thief did, we might have been inside that abbey by now. Fangburn slunk back into the ranks. He hoped Cluny had forgotten, but Cluny rarely forgot anything on a campaign. The element of surprise had been lost. Now they must try another ploy. The show of force. The mere sight of a fully armed horde had worked before, and he had little doubt it would prove effective now. Ordinary peaceful creatures were usually panic-stricken at the sight of Cluny the Scrooge at the head of his army. The rat was a cunning general, except the times when his mad rage took control of him. But what need of Berkey fits for a bunch of silly mice? Cluny knew the value of fear as a weapon, and Cluny was a fearsome figure. His long, ragged, black cloak was made of bat wings, fastened at the throat with a mole skull. The immense war helmet he wore had the plumes of a blackbird and horns of a stag beetle adorned it. From beneath the slanted visor, his one eye glared viciously out at the abbey before him. Mathis's voice rang out sharply and clear from the high prospect. Halt! Who goes there? Redtooth swaggered forward and took up the challenge in his chief's name. As they called back up the walls, "Look, well, all creatures. This is the mighty horde of Gluttony the Scrooge. My name is Redtooth. I speak for Gluttony, our leader." Constance's reply was harsh and unafraid. "Then speak your piece and be gone, rats." Silence hung upon the air while Redtooth and Cluny held a whispered conference. Redtooth returned to the wall. "Cluny the Scrooge says he will not deal with badgers. He will only speak with the leaders of the mice. Let us in so that my chief may sit and talk to your chief." Redtooth dodged back as his request was greeted by howls of directions and some loose piece of masonry from the ramparts. These plump little mice were not so peaceful as they first looked. The rats looked to Cluny as he eyed the abbot, who was sulkingly quiet. Cluny watched tensely, as there seemed to be some disagreement between the old mouse and his two advisers. They conferred a while. Then Mathis came forward to the parapet. He pointed at Cluny and Redtooth with his staff. "You there, and you also. My abbot will talk with you both. The rest must remain outside." The rumble of protest from the horde was silenced by a crack from Cluny's tail. He lifted his visor. "We agree. Mouse, let us in." "But what about hostages for safe conduct?" hissed Redtooth. Cluny spat contemptuously. Don't talk fools talk. Do you imagine a load of mice in funny robes could take me captive?" Redtooth gnawed anxiously in a split claw. "Maybe not, Chief. But have you cast a weather eye over that badger?" Cluny answered quietly out the side of his mouth. "Don't worry, I've been watching her. A real big country bumpkin. No, these are mice of honor. They'd sooner die than break their word to anyone. You leave this to me." As Cluny and Redtooth made for the gatehouse door, Constance shouted, "Put down your weapons, rat. Throw off your armor to show us that you come in peace." Redtooth sputtered angrily. "Hell's teeth. Who does that one think she's ordering around?" Cluny shot him a warning glance. "Quiet. Do as she says." Both rats took off their armor and placed it in a pile on the road. Mathis cried down to Cluny, "If you really are Cluny the Scrooge, then we know of your tale. It is a weapon, therefore you will knot it tightly around your waist, so that it cannot be used." He laughed mirthlessly. He squinted up at Mathis and cracked his tail dramatically. "Young mouse," he called, "you did not ask this thing, for you truly are," looking at Gluttony the Scrooge. Having said this, he took his tail in his claw and pulled the poison war spike from the tip, tossing it on the armor pile. Cluny hitched his tail in a knot around his middle. "Now you will let us in, mice. You can see it. We are unarmed." Ponderously, the heavy gate inched open. The two rats passed through a bristling forest of thieves. The gate slammed shut behind them. Gluttony mentally estimated the walls to be an immense thickness as he and Redtooth ducked their heads. Emerged from the tunnel-like arch into the Abbey grounds, where Constance and Mathis were waiting in the sunlight. The defenders followed the two rats closely, menacing through them with staves. Mathis rapped out a curt command. "Leave us, mice. Go back to your duties on the wall." Unhappy to leave the abbot unguarded, the mice hesitated to obey the order to withdraw. Gluttony addressed Mathis scornfully. "Here, mouse, watch me shift 'em." Suddenly he whirled upon the apprehensive creatures. The single eye rolled mightily in its socket as Gluttony bared his claws and fangs, snarling, "Ha ha! I've got a powerful hunger for mice. You'd best get aloft on those walls. Ha ha!" Gluttony leaned into the air. The mice scattered in panic. Constance stopped the proceedings with a loud, angry bark. "Here now, enough of that rat. You are here to talk with the abbot. Get along with you." Mathis was glad that he was walking behind the rats. He blushed with shame. Gluttony had sent the defenders scattering like butterflies in a whirlwind. Mathis was furious. The enemy now knew he was dealing with untrained and untested soldiers. As the party walked towards Cavern Hole, Cluny could sense the hostility emanating from the young mouse, who flip-flopped behind him in overlarge sandals. Strange for one so young to be counted as a captain, he thought. Moreover, the little fellow didn't seem to fear him. But enough of that. Gluttony would deal with him when the time came. Meanwhile, the big rat gazed about his surroundings in secret admiration. With an astonishing place, he allowed himself to peek at the fortune. One day, this would be called Gluttony's Castle. He liked the sound of that. secure from attack, living off the fat of the land. In his mind's eye, he saw it all, those mice and woodland creatures enslaved, living just to serve him. He could hold sway as far as the eye could see, power, an end to his rovings, a dream come true. King Cluntney. Entering the abbey, the party stopped to make way for a pretty little field mouse bearing a tray. "Oh, Mathis," she said, "I've bought some refreshments for you and—" "Thank you, Cornflower. Put them down on the table," said Mathis abruptly. Redtooth nudged Cluny. "Cornflower, eh?" "Satan's nose. She's a pretty little one for you." Cluny remained silent. He stood insolently watching Cornflower set the table in Cavern Hole. A pretty one indeed. The abbot indicated chairs. They all sat except Cluny, who lounged against the table using the chair as a footstool. He glared at Redtooth until he stood and waited alongside his chief. Idly, Cluny picked up a bowl of honeyed milk and sampled it. Slop. He spat it out on the floor. The abbot folded his paw into the wide sleeves of his habit and stared impassively at Warlord. "What do you want at Redwall Abbey, my son?" Cluny kicked the chair over and laughed madly. As the echoes died around the room, his face went grim. "Your son, huh? That's a good one. I'll tell you what I want, Mouse. I want it all. The lot. Everything. Do you hear me?" Mathis's chair shattered or clattered on its side as he sprang forward, breaking free from the restraining paws of the abbot. "Listen, rat. You don't scare me. I'll give you our answer. You get nothing. Now do you understand that?" Shaking with fury, Mathis allowed himself to be pulled back onto the chair. The abbot turned to Cluny. "You must forgive Mathis. He is young and headstrong. Now, as to your proposal, I am afraid it is out of the question. Should you or your army require medical attention, food, clothing, or help upon your way, you will find us only willing to assist." Cluny interrupted rudely by pounding upon the table until the abbot was silent. He pointed a claw at Redtooth. "Read them the articles." Redtooth held up a tattered parchment. He cleared his throat. "These are the articles of surrender, to be obeyed by the creatures who come under the claw of Cluny the Scrooge, or any of his commanders. 1. Surrender will be a total and unconditional. 2. Cluny will execute the leaders of all who choose to oppose him. 3. All property conquered will belong solely to Cluny the Scrooge. This includes homes, food, crops, land, and additionally all creatures dwelling on said property. They shall be owned by Cluny. Thork." Redtooth got no further. Unable to control himself, Mathis set his staff, rappelling through the middle of the article. As the torn document fluttered to the floor, Redtooth launched himself at Mathis with a snarl. The rat was actually in mid-air when a huge blur paw knocked him flat. He lay stunned with Constance standing over him. Why pick on a small mouse? Surely a big, strong rat like you can deal with an old badger. Come on, try me for size. It was only the timely intervention of Abbot Mortimer that saved Redtooth's life. Constance, would you please let the rat up? Much as I would like to see him get his just desserts, you must remember we cannot break the law of hospitality in our abbey. Redtooth staggered shakily to his feet, backing warily away from the badger. Cluny spoke as if nothing had occurred. You, Abbot Mouse, you have until tomorrow evening to give me your answer. Not normally giving to anger, the abbot surely stared Cluny in the eye, his face a mark of cold fury. I will not need until tomorrow, rat. You can have my answer now. How dare you come here with your robber band to read articles of death and slavery to me? I tell you that neither you nor your army will ever set paw or claw inside Redwall, not while I or any of my creatures have breath in our body to fight and resist you. That is my solemn word. Cluny sneered and turned on his heel, followed by Redtooth. He stamped out. On the stairs between Cavern Hole and Great Hall, he stopped and turned. His cold voice echoed between both chambers. Then die, all of you. Every male, female, and young one. You have refused my terms. Now you will suffer the punishment of Cluny. You will beg on your knees for death to come swiftly, but I shall make your torment loud and long before you die. It was then that Constance did something that creatures would speak of for years to come. Exerting the full strength of a female badger, she lifted the massive Cavern Hole dining table. It was a huge, solid, oaken thing that no dozen mice could even move. Dishes clattered and food spilled as Constance heaved the table above her head. Her voice was a roar. Get out, rats. Leave this abbey. I'm weary of your voices. Hurry before I break the laws of hospitality and ask the abbot's pardon later. Go while you still have skulls. With the best grace he could muster, Cluny walked rather quickly up the stairs, followed by Redtooth, who laughed nervously. Big country bumpkin, eh, Chief? One more word from you back there, and she would have thrown that table and crushed us. Remembering who it was that he had spoken to in this insolent fashion, Redtooth cringed, expecting Cluny to deal with him a blow for impotence, but nothing happened. Cluny was standing transfixed, oblivious to all about him, even Mathis and Abbot, who had followed him out. Cluny stood staring at the tapestry. "Who is that mouse?" he gasped. Mathis followed the direction of the rat's gaze. He walked up to the tapestry and his paw outstretched. "Do you mean this mouse?" Cluny nodded dumbfoundedly. Mathis, still with his paw outstretched, declared proudly, "This is Martin, the warrior. He founded our order, and I'll tell you something else, Rat. Martin was the bravest mouse that ever lived. If he were here today, he'd just take up his big sword and send you and all your bullies packing. Those of you he didn't chop up into crow meat." Much to everyone's surprise, Cluny allowed himself to be shown out. He was like one in a daze all the way back to the gatehouse. A hush fell over the mice on guard as Cluny and Redtooth were led out onto the road. Swiftly, the horde gathered around the warlord and his lieutenant. They awaited orders. Puzzling for Cluny, Redtooth called out, "Form up! Back to the church, everyone!" Cluny marched automatically. Shaking his head in disbelief, Martin the warrior, the mouse who pursued him through his nightmares. What did it mean? As Redtooth marched away, a voice hailed from the wall. He turned around and looked upward. The torn articles of the parchment wrapped around a fistful of rotten vegetables splattered in his face. Livid with rage, he clawed the foul mess from his eyes and saw Constance leaning over the parapet with a wicked grin of delight on her striped muzzle. The badger shouted mimically, "Don't forget to call again, Rat." Excuse me. "I'd be delighted to see you. We've got some unfinished business that I look forward to settling. Just you and me, Redtooth." Before the rat could reply, she vanished from sight. And with that, I think I'm going to stop there. And we'll pick this up tomorrow. Until next time.